two books we have not talked about. Two books we haven't talked about. The first one is Ecclesiastes. Remember, we're talking about wisdom and poetic literature, which means that this is part of the wisdom literature. This is actually speculative wisdom. It's, reflections of a philosopher. Trying to understand the meaning of humanity. It's one of those things that we... Yes? The meaning of humanity. How much humanity there is? I don't know how much humanity there is. That's kind of funny. Actually, these kind of questions, like he's thinking big, is called a philosopher. It's been shown that people, especially at a younger age, that think these big questions do much better in life later on if they're allowed to think these big questions. It's allowed to grow. This is a wonderful book, one of my personal favorites. I'm not going to have the time to go through it as much as I'd love to do. Maybe some other time. It is written by the Kohelet. If you're looking on this, it reads right to left. And you can't see it, but Q, little dot over is O-H-E-L-E-T-H. It reads right to left and kind of at a zigzag. And it means schoolmaster, leader of an assembly, teacher. Traditionally, the writer of the book is Solomon. But the book never actually uses the word, never says that Solomon wrote it. But the tradition holds that Solomon wrote Song of Songs when he was young. He wrote Proverbs when he was in his middle age, and then this one when he was getting up in age. But there's a lot of people that argue against that, as it's not claimed, but that is what tradition holds. And I'm cool with that, but the most we can say is the teacher is the one writing. It starts, I'm bringing it up on both devices. This one, every time the internet goes down, my tablet, and our internet has been kind of spiking today for whatever reason. Yeah, I'm figuring that's what it is. It's frustrating. So I'm going to bring it up on two devices so I always have my notes in front of me. Yes, I know print would be easier for some of you, but not for me. But yeah, it says in Ecclesiastes 1, the words of the teacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. So traditionally, Solomon. And then the very next word, we get kind of the motto of the book. I guess I took that slide out. Oh, that's right, because it wasn't going to show up correctly. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanities. You ever thought about what that word vanity means? Okay, so pride, thinking a lot of yourself, that is one of the uses of the word vanity? I don't think that's exactly what he's looking for in this passage, but that is definitely one of the uses of the word vanities. The reason I say I don't think that's what he's looking for in this passage is because he says, because if we're going to say like it's pride or self-worth, we'd say pride of prides, all is pride. It just doesn't flow with exactly what I think he's wanting. What does a person gain of all his toils? Meaningless, your version might say meaningless. Futility, okay, futility. I thought you said fertility. I'm like, that's not, don't think that's what we're going for. The word in the Hebrew can also, it's not the primary word for breath, but it can also mean breath. So meaningless might be a better use of it. Vapor. When I think of this passage, I think of the great poets and philosophers when they say everything is dust in the wind. Yeah, Kansas. No, it does have a kind of a it's fleeting. Everything is meaningless, without grasp. Yeah. No purpose. Yeah. So yeah. So it's kind of in vain that we do everything. That's why I think the way they're using that vanity in this sense is that it's in vain. I do believe that's a psalm. I do believe, but I'm not positive. Yeah, I think that's what they're really looking for here, is that it's all just kind of grasping at the air. And, what does a person gain from all his toils, which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth stands forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down. I tell you what, if you're already in a bad place, this will make you even more depressed. It's actually not a bad, depressive book, but if you're already in a bad place, this ain't gonna help. Oh, yeah, everything's already a waste of time. Why am I bothering? The wind goes to the south, the wind goes to the north, around and around it goes, the circuit of the wind. All streams flow to the sea, and the sea is never full. That's like saying, like my cup is always being poured, but I never have a full cup. But don't we all, isn't that really how we feel sometimes in life? Like, what's the point of all this? It just seems like it's, why am I doing this? I just feel like I know as a pastor, there are times when I'm like, I just preached a sermon. I got to turn around and write another one. Now I got to turn around and do it again. Like every week's the same thing. And if you're already starting to feel down, that really starts to, it's just like, And that's just kind of how I feel like he is here in this passage. Just kind of like, oh my goodness, why? What's the point of all this? He's the teacher or the preacher, and he's like, I just, what's twisted can't be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. Nothing in it is real value, and But if it is Solomon that wrote it, think about the things that he has tried in his life. If it is Solomon, 700 wives, 300 concubines, riches, wisdom, building. He has great building. He has his army. according to legend, he has wealth untold. I mean, he's tried it all. I mean, maybe that's where real wisdom comes in, is he's tried it all. And he's like, it's just, it all comes down. I think the most popular passage in the psalm, in this verse, is Ecclesiastes 3. I don't know, this one actually kind of gives you hope. After you had this kind of depressing chapters 1 and 2, chapter 3 kind of gives you a bit of hope, For everything there is an appointed time, and a time for everything under the heavens. Like this now is not forever. I love that. I had a pastor tell me that when I was really down and in a bad spot one time, and it's got me through. And now I just repeat it all to myself and tell everyone else. It's just one of those things. Now is not forever. Everything's temporary. This too shall pass. I mean, it's and that's what he said. Everything is appointed time. Everything matter under the heavens. A time to bear, and a time to have birth, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to root up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, a time to build up. A time to weep, a time to laugh. A time to mourn, a time to dance. Everything happens in its season. Everything happens in life, and it's not something we can be down and out about. It's just, that's life. And so after we've had this kind of depressing, everything's kind of grasping dust in the wind, he's like, life happens. Nothing lasts forever. In this life or the next, it changes. Time to tear down, time to sow, time to be silent, time to speak, time to love, time to hate, time for war, time for peace. And that's how all of Ecclesiastes is kind of in this vein. That there's a time for everything. Oops. Yeah. It's all part of this bigger plan that God's put into play, right? And his chapters are all kind of this speculative. And I'm not going to go through every chapter. It is very fun to go through. But it's all kind of in the same vein, the same kind of mode. He looks and he sees oppression that occurs under the sun. And he sees the tears, and that's chapter 4. He sees the tears of the oppressed, and no one will comfort them. Those who oppress them are powerful. No one will comfort them. So I deem the dead who have already died more fortunate than the living who are still alive, but better off both of them than one who has not yet been born, and one has not seen the evils that are done under the sun. I look around and I see all this bad stuff. I mean, and couldn't we say that about every era, right? I mean, we could definitely say it about now, right? But every generation has that. You look around and you see bad stuff. I mean, isn't that why we're waiting on the new earth and the new heaven and the new earth? Because every generation we look around and we see that, hey, we do live in a fallen and corrupt world. And every generation says to the last generation, you screwed it up, and every generation says, no, it's getting worse. It's funny. I was reading a book about the 1800s, and they said the next generation is the worst generation I've ever seen. I was like, wow, they sound like they're just... Yeah, without, yeah, it just goes around and around. I mean, even our span in this world is so short, and we have God that gives us some sense of purpose. But even with that, we're still just part of we're here for, what if we're lucky, 120 years? Most of us more like, yeah, right? Some of you are like, I don't want to be there that long. 80 years, 70 years. The average, I think, is like, 76 and 77 or something like that, 75, 77. And that's, and so, because we see, and the reason we like, please, I don't want to live 120 years, because by the time we get up there, we're like, our bodies are falling apart. We see all the stuff that we don't want to deal with anymore. And that's where this author seems to be at in his own life. And he's, he says, those who have the worst, those who haven't been born yet, because they're going to have to come up in a world that's worse than the one we have. That's what he says. I mean, it's going to be worse for them because they haven't seen this yet. So it's going to be worse for them. And I think about, how many of us have thought about that with our own kids? Like, we want kids, we love them, and we love our kids, but at the same time you think, wow, I think of my kids, and the world that they're growing up in is like, it seems so much worse than the one I grew up in. And it's not something that's new. That's the thing, it's not new. It's just that hamster wheel. Yeah, that I've done some research on that. In the Cold War era, they developed a respect for God because they were combating the atheism of communism. That's actually where a lot of it comes from. And so even in the school system was teaching God because they were combating more than just, it was the communist. And that's one of the reasons why it was allowed, in schools as much. And then, and also we had more people that were believing in church and God. And, there's others, there was an insurgent of churches. People were able to travel more because of the invention of the cars and getting around. And people found God like crazy in World War I and World War II. Why wouldn't you, right? I was reading a book. Where did I hear that? I was reading Stephen Ambrose's D-Day, and they were talking about, well, of course I found God. And he was talking about how he found God on the beaches of Normandy.
Yeah, Becky told me that. The atheists they didn't believe, right? There was something in it. But they all said, thank you, Jesus, pass me the ammo, because they had ammo.
Yeah, everyone found God on D-Day. And so it's one of those things that, and there was a respect for at least Christians older generation. But this is not something that's new. The United States, we have to remember, the United States is really, really young. And as far as nations go, this rise of a cultural myth, I'm going to use that term in an academic sense. Cultural myth is whatever drives a nation. And part of that in the United States was Christianity. That's not all of it. That you can have a house, white picket fence, get your job. That culture, that all kind of ties into a cultural myth, as political scientists call it. And right now we're seeing the death of the cultural myth. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much confusion and anger and turmoil, and because the death of the cultural myth that includes our reliance on God, but also more than that, like the idea that you can have a white picket fence and, you can't afford a house anymore unless you're very wealthy, or, I could work one summer and pay for, I was talking to my mom, and she was, she worked during the summer and paid for her whole college for the next year. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. I don't know how we're going to get my kids through it. And that's just the way it is, And so I think that's, what one of the things he's saying here. And that's one of the things why I like this book, is because it asks the questions, and we can apply it to our own lives, and we can think these questions in this book. How do we deal with these things, and yeah. Like I said, I don't want to go through all of it. One, because I also want to talk about Song of Solomon's today. Yeah. $3.11. God has set eternity in their heart. Yeah. Well, I think that's it. We have the hope. That's one of the things that the apocalyptic literature, we were talking about apocalyptic, a couple weeks ago, why it's so important is because it gives us the hope of the future. Because it does set our hearts on something above, something further. Yeah, it's not. We're not home yet. There's cadences of home. We're longing for home. Cadence of Home is a book edited by Walter Brigham, and I don't like everything that Walter Brigham says, but that's a really good book. If you're interested, it's not the easiest read, but it's a good book. Cadences of Home. I think when we really bust down, and like I said, I don't want to talk about everything that's in Ecclesiastes because he kind of, focuses on different things, but it all kinds of goes the same route. But it comes down to this. This is the whole crux. This is the focus of Ecclesiastes. After all that has been heard, here is the final conclusion. This is it. Fear God, obey His commandments. That's the whole duty of man. What is the point of humanity? What's our job? What's our purpose? How does it all come down? This is it. This is what he concludes with. Fear God, obey His commands. What else do we need? And I was thinking about that lately myself. Someone asked me about discerning the will of God for their lives. And I was thinking, 90% of the time when we're talking about discerning the will of God in our lives, it's just obeying God in the day-to-day little stuff. I mean, only that 10% is not, that doesn't mean that 10% is not hard and we have to pray about it and fast and all this, But 90% of it is laid out in the Scriptures. Obey God. Fear God and obey His commandments. It's just laid out for us. That's 90% of the will of God for our lives. All right. I do want to go on to Song of Songs, because I want to finish today. Song of Songs. This is one of those interesting books. I'm going to talk about things, and then we're going to watch one of those Bible Project videos, one last Bible Project videos, because they're so beautiful. And it's going to cover stuff that I've already talked about and some things that I'm not going to talk about because it's in the video. But Song of Songs. How many of you guys actually read Song of Songs like that's like your book, right? Anyone? I knew a guy in college, I kid you not, he loved the Song of Songs, used it as pickup lines all the time. Yep, they were his pickup lines. I don't know if it ever worked for him, but he did it. It is an interesting book. It's one of those books that doesn't mention God anywhere in it. You know, a lot of Jewish circles, you're not even allowed to read it until you're 12 years old. It's well, that's one of the things that gets argued about. Who is it referring to? It starts out right off the title Song of Song, which is for Solomon. That's how it starts. That's what it reads. The Song of Songs, which is for Solomon. So some people call it the Song of Solomon, thinking that Solomon is the author. Some people say, no, Solomon is the young man. Some people say, no, Solomon's not he's only the main character at the end of the book. And he's not the young man. He's actually, it's in the style of the wisdom of Solomon. The truth is, we don't know. We don't know who wrote this. We don't really know who the shepherd lover is. Solomon is spoken of in the third person and towards the end of the book. It does seem to be a collection of love songs. That people throughout history have struggled. What do we do with this? You ever read this book and like, well, what do I do with this? In the Bible Broadman commentary, it says, often in circles, a Song of Solomon is seen as an embarrassment for Judaism and church because no mention of God. It's highly erotic. So for some people, it's actually a sense of embarrassment. And actually, when you look at what was put in the canon of the Bible, and what we used that word canon. What was put in the canon and what was not put in the canon. This book was actually highly contested. The rabbinical school of this, kind of the conservatives said, we don't want it in there. And the more liberal school, the Hillel school, says, let's put it in there. And they argued back and forth about it. But in the Council of Yamnia, which we did talk about, remember that one? It was retained as part of the scriptures. It is one of those things that was almost left out. Of course, we can understand that. How many of you guys have actually... Okay, how many of you guys have actually, read the Song of Solomon? Read it? Yeah, there's a lot of you have not. A lot of you have. How many of you were, comfortable when you read it? You're like, I'm not sure I really understand it, or I'm not sure I want to read this. I mean, maybe if you're into the romance novels, you might have been like, this is my favorite book in the Bible. This is... Throughout history, people have argued what to do with the book of Song of Songs. The first way that people tend to use it is more of an allegorical sense. This is first in Judaism, where God is the husband and Israel is the wife. And so it's allegorical. It represents God's love for his people. And this definitely one way we can use it, and throughout history it's been seen that way. Perfectly good way to use it. It traveled from there into Christian circles with a little bit switch in character. Christ is the husband and the church is the wife. Traveling away from God and Israel to Christ and the church. Very popular. I remember reading Origen's works, and which, when we talk about church history, we'll talk about Origen. He really, really popular, big into spreading the allegorical look on Song of Solomon. Very popular way. Another way that people look on it is more of a literal sense, and of course, I have trouble with that word literal, because I've discovered that what means like what St. Augustine said was literal, it may not be what we see it as literal. Literal kind of is one of those words that change depending on your encyclopedia. Remember we talked about that encyclopedia word, way back at the beginning, how we come at this with our own encyclopedia and we need to build kind of their encyclopedia and into our encyclopedia. According to your encyclopedia, literal kind of changes, but one way I've seen it used was to explore in the proper dating and marriage relationship. Went through an entire series on how to date and then marry through the Book of Songs. Kind of a fun interpretation. I don't know if I personally hold to that one, but I enjoyed the study. Of course, erotic poetry is a very literal way to take it. And actually this is probably the way I look at it most closely. When we look at other, like, Canaanite and Egyptian eras, we find these kind of erotic poetry collections that are similarly written in ancient writings. It was kind of like one of the things you did. So it's kind of an election of kind of poetry, of this kind of romantic poetry. Oh, I think you're right, Alan. I think you're absolutely right. One of the reasons we have trouble with this one is because the SCX word. It's something that's become so taboo. Actually, in some circles, even the original sin was sex. Because sex has become so taboo. And, that's one of the reasons why the world dictates what sex and what a proper relationship looks like, because the church ain't talking about it. And I think, that is very true. We get uncomfortable with the fact that this may just be a collection of love poetry that has a storyline throughout it, because we're uncomfortable with the sexual overtones behind this book. I think it's very good point, Alan. There are some other interpretations of this. We have compared it to I don't like the word pagan, but pagan cultic practices. It is similar to the Syrian wedding songs, and so we could compare it to wedding songs of the era, And like I said, I knew a guy who used this as a pickup line, so it kind of feels like a wedding song, right? And there are some parts that are very beautiful in there. Another interpretation of it they saw it as a drama, like a play, an early play. that was being put on. Like this is like Shakespeare kind of play. Like you would dramatize it. But very romantic. And it does have a storyline that goes through it. I don't know if I have... There's a storyline that kind of goes through it. And this will be in the video as well. They kind of do their dramatic, which is one of the reasons I'm going to show it, is because they do it very artsy, and I like the way they do it. It's got initial encounter of two lovers, and they struggle to be together. And what it means to be together, and every time things get a little racy, things kind of just stop in the scriptures. And some people, and it's funny how people try to like be archaeologists with the words, and I'm not really a big fan of that, but they do it anyways. They like try to dig in. Well, that's because someone changed it and they took out the racy parts. And some said, no, it's just how it's written, because look at the Canaanite, the Egyptian examples, the Syrian examples, they all kind of follow that vein. Anyways, there's the wedding procession. There is a sexual union that we don't get to privy of too much. And praise of the groom. The woman and the man take on a royal identity at one point, and the man and woman express their desires to be together. And then there's this closing encounter between the lovers. And it's kind of how the story progresses. And you could take each separate section as like its own poem, and then. So people argue about was it originally its own and then someone put it together in this kind of way, or was it written this way? And the truth is, we just probably won't ever know. But it is a very beautiful thing. And I do think if we're to understand it, it is maybe all of the above. It is an example of love poetry from the time period. It is about how we love one another, in a sexual manner or in a dating relationship. It is about how God loves us, and an example of how in the that He in other passages in the scriptures say Ephesians we are the bride of Christ, and so we. I think we can tie it to that allegory as well. So maybe the question isn't which one is right, but maybe it's all of them are okay.
I think that is one of the beautiful parts about this, is because marriage is the first institution that God has established, and He loves marriage.
He does love marriage. He does love marriage, and He wants to protect it, and guards it jealously, and and I don't know. Like I said, maybe it's all of the above. Maybe it is a wonderful example of Hebrew love poetry from the time period. Maybe it is an example of God's love. We can tie those passages of Ephesians, and Paul talks about us being the bride. Maybe he is thinking of Song of Solomon. He could absolutely be thinking of of those passages when he writes that. We don't know. And maybe it's also about two lovers, and we can take wisdom from that as we are. Most of us will find someone to love and, marry, and yeah. Yeah, my sister, my bride, that gets a little uncomfortable, doesn't it? That I'm not sure exactly all about that, but a lot of times that's just calling someone like you're part of my family. We're she may be part of. See, a lot of times in tribal societies, you're related not necessarily by blood, but by blood. Like how does this work? I know in the Navajo, it's by the mother's side. So if someone, they're distant cousins maybe, but they're called sisters. So like if a young man cannot marry someone from his mother's tribe, no matter how distantly related, they're still they're still considered sister. Or mother. They're still considered mother because it's from the mother's tribe. And so there might be some of that going on there as well. To be honest with you, I'm not sure about all that. I think that's one of those things that ties into some of the confusion. Because, that's one of those things that's not in my encyclopedia. And so, yeah, David. You're going to have to refresh my memory. Which one was chapter 5? Okay, so you're going to Revelation with it. I've heard that before. I don't know if that's where we're supposed to go with it. And knock, right? I don't know if that's really where we're supposed to. It's definitely a way we can go with it. I don't know if that's where we're supposed to go with it, but it's definitely a way we can go with it. That goes back to a very allegorical way of looking at it, which, like I said, may be right. Maybe it is. We can't know, like when he says, I stand at the door and knock, we can't know if that's what they were thinking of with these kind of passages or something else. It doesn't tell us. She's not going to get out of bed for it. There's this this union between, like I said, every time they get to the little race, things happen, and they're always trying to get to each other. In the whole book, like there's this separation that happens, and then there's like the whole book is kind of like this chase scene. In my mind, like a lot of passages have this kind of like this separation of the two, and they're trying to get together, and they're I don't know. In the end, I think if we're going to look at it truthfully, it's a fun passage that is about two lovers going through life that reflects God's love. At that time period, yeah. I mean, and they say a lot of things that we're not supposed to take literally. Like at one point it says his eyes are like doves, which we're supposed to ponder on what does that mean. We're supposed to ponder on what are the characteristics of a dove that would make his eyes like doves, and are they peaceful, or are they pure, gentle? I don't, like we could go through all these things, and they're not supposed to be like be really weird if we take it too literally. A neck is like a strong wall. Symbolic symbolisms and literalism, and it's a fun passage, and some of it is just we have to take it as, it is poetry, and poetry does take a lot of liberties with the figurative language. We do that today. Even one of the reasons I struggled with poetry in high school was because it was so figurative. But I struggled with it, because I'm a very literal guy. And I struggled with the poetic meanings of stuff. My brother, no problem. But me, I struggled with it like crazy. Because
and the danger is reading between the lines, making it say something it doesn't say.
making it say, yeah, we call that eisegesis. When you read into something that it doesn't say. And that's always a challenge. We have to do that with every passage in the Bible, though. We want to extract exegesis, extract what it does say. We don't want to insert something that's not in there. When I was in college and I was taking this seminary class, he was warning about on preaching. He was a preaching class. So his first sermon he preached the very first day was why taking showers were bad, and he used scriptures every step of the way. The point was that, if you want to take the scriptures and make it say anything that you wanted to say, even if whether you're doing it on purpose or you're just reading it badly, you can make it say anything you want it to. But yeah, his first sermon, it took him about 20 to 30 minutes for this sermon on why showers were bad. But that was the lesson for the day. It stuck with me. Most of the rest of the class, not so much, but that lesson stuck with me. Because the rest of the class we were talking about different types of preaching and how to use the Old Testament and all these other boring stuff, and that one stuck with me. Yeah, the textbook's like that thick for this. I still have it floating around my house. I have never read it again, but I still have it. Anyways. All right, we got enough time. Let's watch this video. This is the Song of Song overview by the Bible Project. I love the artistic way they express the Song of Songs. Hopefully it'll play.
The Song of Songs.
There it goes.
It's a well done but not so well understood book of the Bible. It's 8 chapters of love. And while there is an introduction and a conclusion, the book doesn't have any kind of rigid literary design. And that's because it's a collection of poems. They're not meant to be dissected or taken apart. They're meant to be read as a flowing whole and simply enjoyed. The first line of the book tells us that it's the Song of Songs, which is a Hebrew idiom, like the Holy of Holies or the King of Kings. It's a Hebrew way of saying the greatest thing. So this is the greatest song of all songs. Then we're told in the first line that this Song of Songs is of Solomon, which could mean that he's the author. His name does begin the book, after all. But as you read the poems, you discover that the main voice is that of a woman called the Beloved. And while there is also a male voice, it does not seem to be Solomon's. Solomon is mentioned a couple times in the poems, but he's never a speaker. And you do have to admit, Solomon is a very odd candidate as the author of this book, given the fact that he had 700 wives. For the lovers in the Song of Songs, they are the only ones in the world for each other. So the of Solomon likely means in the wisdom tradition of Solomon. He was known for his wisdom, his poetry, his love of learning about every part of life. And Solomon became the father of wisdom literature in Israel. And so his legacy is here carried on through a collection of love poems that explores the human experience of love and sexual desire. The opening poem introduces us to the basic theme of this book. We hear the voice of the young woman who delights in her man, a shepherd. Now, she's not married to him yet, but it becomes clear that they're engaged and they cannot wait to be together. From the introduction, the poems flow back and forth from the woman's voice to the man's, shifting from scene to scene without any kind of clear linear sequence or storyline. The poems move in these symphonic cycles, and key images and ideas get repeated and developed. So, one of the basic themes uniting the poems is the intense desire that this couple has for each other, expressed through their constant seeking and finding. So, after the opening poem, they're separated but on the hunt for one another. So the woman calls out, or she'll wake up from a dream or go looking for her lover, and more than once they'll find each other, they'll embrace, and then right when things start to get a bit racy, the scene will suddenly end. and a new one will start. They're separated, looking for each other, and on it goes. Another repeated theme is the joy of the couple's physical attraction for one another. So multiple times, they'll pause and describe each other with these elaborate metaphors. And here it's very helpful to know that these images and metaphors in Hebrew poetry are not primarily visual. If you try and paint a picture of these people based on the metaphors, you will end up with something that looks very, very strange. What you're supposed to do is reflect on the meaning of these images as they relate to the man and the woman. So you'll read through the poetic cycles, and the tension will keep building in their desire and joy and attraction. And this spiraling repetition is a poetic way of heightening and focusing on the mystery and power of sexual love. It all comes together in the conclusion, which pauses to summarize what these poems are all about. Love is as strong as death. Its passions are as severe as the grave. Its flashes are of fire, a divine flame. Many waters cannot extinguish love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, he would be utterly scorned. The poem highlights the power and the intensity of love, how it's both beautiful but also dangerous. Like fire, love can destroy people if it's abused, or be life-giving if it's protected. Ultimately, love expresses the insatiable human longing to know and be fully known and desired by another. Love is one of the most transcendent and mysterious experiences in human life, and as a part of the Bible's wisdom tradition, this book says it's a gift from God. After this, there's an odd poem about Solomon trying to do what the previous poem just said was impossible, to buy love. The woman rejects Solomon's offer, and then the book concludes with the man and the woman. They're separate once more on the hunt for each other. He calls to hear her voice. She begs him to run away with her, and that's how the book ends. Just totally open-ended. But that's a lot like love, which never truly concludes, because there's always more to discover and pursue in your beloved. And so true love has no end, and neither does this book. Now, through history, the big question raised by the Song of Songs is, what on earth is love poetry doing in the Bible? There have been three main interpretations of this book throughout history. In Jewish tradition, it's been read as an allegory, each character a symbol. So the woman is Israel, the man is God, and their love is a symbol of the covenant between God and Israel made at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. This view flowed into the Christian tradition, but the characters were swapped. So it's about Christ's love for his people, the church. And this interpretation was inspired by Paul's words in Ephesians 5, that a Christian husband's love for his wife is a symbol of Christ's love for the church. What's interesting is that in the last 100 years, archaeological discoveries among Israel's ancient neighbors in Egypt and Babylon has turned up all kinds of ancient love poetry that's very similar in language and imagery to the Song of Songs. We see that love poetry was a meaningful part of Israel's cultural environment, which has led most scholars today to view the Song of Songs as what it presents itself to be, an arrangement of Israelite love poetry reflecting on the divine gift of love. But that doesn't mean that it's only ancient love poetry. There's a key feature of these poems that sticks out when you read them as a part of the Old Testament, and that's the overwhelming use of garden imagery. There are powerful echoes of the Garden of Eden and the idyllic scene between the married couple in the early chapters of Genesis. So the image of the man and the woman naked and vulnerable, but completely unified and safe with one another, this resonates in the background of the Song of Songs. It's as if in these poems we are witnessing the love of a couple whose relationship is untainted by selfishness and sin. And so ultimately the song holds out hope that even though our own relationships are so often distorted by selfishness, love is a transcendent gift. And it's meant to point us to something greater, to the gift of God's love that will one day permeate and transform his beloved world. And that's what the Song of Songs is all about.
Ain't that good? I love their artistry. It helps me kind of grasp visually some of the things they're talking about and that we've talked about as we've gone through this. That just kind of, see some things. And, every image they draw is very well thought out. They're trying to convey a certain message and not other messages, so they think it out very carefully. That's why I like the Bible Project. Helps me a lot as I'm processing some of these things. That's why I wanted to share it with you. And I like that one because it helped me, understand how, things are intertwined and, yeah, they don't make sense. And, some of the things I was thinking. But, well, that's the end of the Old Testament. We have briefly gone over every book and many of the key themes. And
The Word of God is the greatest book on love because the author is love.
the author is love. So, yes. As long as we remember that love is not God, God is love. And that's, but we've gone through it all, and Old Testament, and we're getting ready to go into the New Testament. I'm probably going to make reference to some of the material that's in between the Old Testament and New Testament that's not in our scriptures, but I probably am not going to go through them. Because as interesting as they are, I want to stick to the scriptures at this point. But we might go back and look at some of them as we go through the New Testament because they do influence the New Testament. Yeah. What? Yes, Angel. Am I going to give you some homework for the month of December? I can. Would you like that? I'm a little busy. I don't know about you guys. I was kind of looking for a hiatus, but I could definitely give you some homework if you'd like. We could start with reading the book of Enoch and Judith and Tobit. Those are all books that are in between that I'm going to skip and not go over. There are books in between. Tobit's one of my personal favorite. It's a lot of fun. Jubilee is another one of those. I heard it described as fan fiction. They're a big fan of the Bible, so they wrote this fiction story based on the Bible. Enoch is one of those really important books for the development of the New Testament. I'm agreeing it shouldn't be part of our scriptures. It was heavily influenced. Jesus was influenced by it. Jude was influenced by it. But, if you want homework, the best thing you can do is actually go back and, look through our notes, re-listen to the things that we talked about, key parts that, where, so you can get kind of that grasp of where we're at. So as we tackle the New Testament, we're going to be feeding off just because we're done with the Old Testament doesn't mean the themes that we've already started ends. The New Testament is built on the Old Testament. I know a lot of times we as Christians want to the New Testament's what matters. But that's like saying your foundation doesn't matter. I only live on the first floor, so I don't need that foundation. We're going to continue to build upon the ideas that were from the Old Testament. And we did this very briefly, even though we spent a year and a half on it. It was so brief. So there's lots of room for you to study and work your way through, your favorite areas. I know personally my favorite area of study is the dialogue between God, his people, and the pagan religions or the other religions and cultures of the era. throughout, whether it's in Ezekiel or in Jeremiah or Isaiah or Genesis. Or I love the dialogue between the religions, and how, like, this one borrows from that one, and they play off each other, and sometimes make fun of it, and sometimes they call it out, sometimes they accept it and synchronize. And I love that dialogue that goes through it. That's my personal favorite area of study. All right, anything else we want to say? It is after 7, which I said I'd try to get us out on time. And I failed. We're 8 minutes over. All right, let's go ahead and pray, and we'll see you guys here, I guess, January 4th on Tuesday nights when we're starting back up for the New Testament. Take a break, rest, go through, kind of solidify some of these ideas you have in your head. If you're stressing about the holiday season, I know a lot of us got a lot going on. It's take a breather. Rest is important, even if it's noetic rest, that we're have to still work, but we're still resting. And anyways, so we'll be ready for the New Testament when we get back. All right. Father God, we praise you today, Lord. We thank you for this time of rest that's coming up. Lord, we pray that we not forget to return in January, but we take this time to just kind of solidify our ideas and look at these, remind ourselves of the themes that we've seen through this whole last year, that we prepare ourselves for the coming of the study of the New Testament, how brief that will be, and continuing on until into church history, as we look at the foundation of the church as it is. And we pray that you just reveal yourself as we see our dialogue with you, and as you dialogue with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.